Hello and welcome to PHP Release Radar episode 5 about Flysystem with Franke De Jonge. Hello Frank, and thanks for joining. Before we start, if you have questions while we speak and want to ask Frank about Flysystem, hit it in the chat box and we will ask him while we speak. And I think there is a sound issue on my side, sorry. So, Frank, welcome, and could you please give us a short introduction? Who are you and how did you get become a PHP developer, and maybe how did Flysystem start?
Yeah, hey. Hi everybody. My name is Frank. My full name would be Franke De Jonge if you pronounce it like a Dutch person. I'm a software engineer at Molly. We process payments, so if you need to receive money, check us out maybe. I sort of entered the PHP space by accident. I was always skateboarding, and then through that alternative scene, I got into contact with people who were playing some funk music, and of course, so I became a drummer for that band. And then, of course, when you're a band, you need a website, right? So,
Sure.
but we didn't have no money to spend, so I thought, well, creating a website can't be that hard. So I tried to figure it out. It turned out to be a little bit harder than I thought it would be. Then I got a friend that lived in the neighborhood to help me set up my first dynamic things with PHP. That was a shoutbox, which was very popular at that time when I started programming.
Yeah,
Of
that's maybe
course,
15 years ago or something.
uh, I think it's like 12 years. No, might be somewhere between those ranges, right? I can't tell for sure anymore. But of course, this was all very much not secure, and I got hacked, of course. So I got a lot of, let's call it spicy iframes embedded on my website, and a lot of JavaScript alert that said, shaken, not stirred. So somebody was definitely pulling a prank on me. And then I thought, well, this should never happen again. I should figure out why this went the way it went. So effectively, this person that hacked my little hobby project in the end gave me this career. So, I still don't know to this day who it is, but I would still would like to thank that person because I really love what I'm doing right now. So no regrets there. So yeah, I think that the majority of the people know me through my work of creating Flysystem. Flysystem is a file system abstraction layer that I created a good number of years back already, since yeah, quite some time now. And it was first actually created for me to not have to be at an office. So I was working for a client, and that client needed some code that directly needed to interface with an FTP server. That FTP server had a whitelist of where the IPs would come from that I would be able to talk to. So I could only talk to that FTP, so really develop stuff if I was at the office.
Uh,
And this was like it took me an hour and a half from my home to that office to go there, and preferably I would just also be able to work from it on it from home. So the idea for me came about to have a standard interface for something that I had in my control, so a local file system, and something that was external. The first sort of incarnation of Flysystem was just within that project where I got an abstraction layer in, just an interface, two implementations, and I was able to divert from one and the other. So
okay.
that's sort of how it came about.
So at first, it's a local file system and FTP. So
Yeah,
nowadays there are a lot more adapters, right? The concept is the adductor. So um,
yeah.
I think there are multiple ones for AWS as well. Do you maintain them yourself, or do you still focus on FTP?
Well, so when I first started really investing in Flysystem as a standardized solution, I was under the naive impression that one, I would have to work with FTP more often, and that was also the case. But I was under the naive impression that if I would solve it once, I would never have to write FTP code again, because FTP code is not really nice. Well, joke's on me, because if you maintain the library, you're the person who's always dealing with the FTP issues, nobody else. Make of that what you will. Maybe my decisions along that line have not been smart for myself, but I think they have been very beneficial for other people. If you look at all the adapters, I think the majority of the maintenance is on me, so well above the 95% mark of the contributions are solely done by me. I've had a number of contributions recently, so that's nice. So that's increasing. What's his? I always forget his. I'm gonna look up his name, because otherwise I will butcher. Yeah, it's Tobias Nijholm. He contributed the async AWS adapter. So that's the first adapter that was fully contributed by an external that I now also have the maintenance for. But he helps out with the maintenance for that as well. So that's awesome. But for the majority of the time, like designing V2 and designing V1 and doing the majority of the maintenance of V1, yeah, that's all a solo effort. I don't think file systems are that sexy of a space to really attract a lot of contributors. But then again, a lot of people use it. So if people are interested, of course, this is very, very welcome. There's a big audience behind it, massive amounts of consumers. So that's, I think, a pretty unique thing to have within the open source community.
Yeah, and I think Tobias does a lot of async AWS things, and I'm pretty sure he will help out maintaining that adapter.
Oh yeah, definitely. He's across the board. He's a very solid open source contributor. Like he's one of the, I think, few that successfully maintains multiple projects and still contributes to other projects.
Yes.
Like I do that as much as I can, but I just don't know where they find the time. It's like.
Yeah, you mentioned that about 95% of the contributions in the adapters and the maintenance is done by you, and Flysystem is, I think, the most popular file system library, abstraction library in the PHP ecosystem. And I think the packages stats are quite high. But what would you say? Why is it so successful? How did it become one of the most popular PHP libraries?
Well, so there's the thing that I like to believe, and there's the thing that I actually think it is. When I designed Flysystem, I focused a lot on eliminating any form of abstraction leak. So the consuming code is really unaware, or as much unaware as it can be, about what happens behind the interface. So this translates into a couple of design decisions. For example, all the paths that you specify are relative, because if you move from an FTP server to AWS, well, the things that you're uploading to are not going to be on the home/some FTP user directory, right? So they're going to be in a different route. So this meant that the base of the route are a matter of configuration, and what you base off of that route is whatever is in your application code. And this benefits portability of your code and the stability of your programs. So this is just one of the concepts that I employed to enable that. The other one is the difference in responses from different file systems. So everything is mapped to a uniform concept. So, and that's the same for Flysystem 1 and Flysystem 2. Like if you want to get a timestamp, it's always a Unix timestamp, so a last modified thing. Any response that's mapped that, you never get some raw value that you can inspect and see, well, okay, this one is AWS and the other one is FTP. You never know, but you also never have to know. So these kind of design decisions, they really matter. There are some flaws in Flysystem 1, and the downside of success is that as long as that success lives on, you're always confronted with your own mistakes. So that, in the end, was the driver to work on Flysystem 2.
Okay.
But this is the thing that I thought, well, that I like to believe is the main driver for my success, and it might be in proxy as well, but without a doubt, the fact that Laravel embraced Flysystem as their go-to file storage solution is just without a doubt the biggest contributor to the success of Flysystem. So it of course gave it a big boost in terms of downloads. You saw basically as soon as they picked it up and that new release of Laravel was out, you could just see the downloads hockey stick. It was insane. I didn't know what was happening. So of course I knew it, but
Okay.
I did not expect it to take off that quickly. Right now, what you notice is that, of course, my downloads are higher than just Laravel's because every Laravel install means a Flysystem install. But of course, there's different integrations. Pretty much all the major frameworks have some sort of an integration with it. And for many tools or many developers, it's a go-to tool now that it's got this legitimacy also due to the downloads. I think I do a good enough job to keep all the bugs and the issues to a minimum. So rigorous testing and quick releases. That's how I think a project like this should be maintained. So that's the standard that I hold for myself.
And how did it went down? Did Taylor Otwell write you an email and say, "Hey, Frank, there's going something to happen," or did you just saw it on GitHub, or was it more a surprise?
Yeah, I think he either on Telegram or on Twitter. Well, he asked in a bit of a vague Taylor-ish way. I think he asked like, "Hey, when is V1 of Flysystem coming out?" And that's sort of how I knew that something was up.
Okay.
So it became clear in the days after, and you could see leading up to V1, there's a big boost in contributions because I wanted to make sure that if this gets adopted, right, either I will be overflown with issues, or I preemptively turn tight all the nuts and bolts and make sure that nothing is wrong. So I spent a lot of time crystallizing that. Making sure that I thought I ironed out all the design mistakes. Of course, I forgot some. But after that, I tagged the 0. or the 1.0 release. And then soon after the release of Laravel, I think it was shipped with Laravel 4. Could be, no, I think it's 4. So when that was released, of course, that was also a big release for Laravel itself. So that just took the PHP world by storm, and I was really happy to be along for the ride, and have been ever since. So like Flysystem 2 is integrated for Laravel 9. Which is now pushed a half year back because they just switched to yearly release cycles. So they have to wait a little longer, but I've got a surprise coming up for the people who are stuck on V1 due to dependencies. So they will be able to sort of double boot the Flysystem installation. Um, but yeah, that's sort of how it came about.
That's quite interesting story. You often wonder how maintainers interact with each other and pick up the libraries and use them. So it's quite interesting to get some insights. Um, you mentioned you have some um, own standards about maintaining the library and tackling issues and having tackling bugs. How does it work for you? Do you invest a lot of free time? Can you work in your time at Molly on Flysystem, or how does it work for you?
Yeah, so my time at Molly is just fully spent on Molly. I'm a staff engineer at Molly, so that means my primary job is not to write code, but it's more to make sure that I enable other people to do just that. That doesn't mean I don't write code, but it's not the majority of
Mhm.
my time spent. So I do have an agreement with them that if a bug report that is critical and actually security release, then I can work on it. No questions asked. For the other time, it's also no questions asked, but I think, yeah, for the company, I just work on company stuff. And then my time spent on it is mostly nighttime and weekends. So it is still quite a lot of that. If you look at Flysystem V2, this was all just evening work and evening hours and weekends, and a lot of them. So shout out to my girlfriend for not getting to spend so much time with me, but she's still with me, so I guess I did something right.
And when we won't tackle the Flysystem 2 in the first part, but how did you get the ideas to, or what was the main motivation? Because I looked it up. So the first tag of Flysystem was in 2013,
Yeah.
and there were a couple of tags until 2015. So that's the version one, and it's about 5 years for version two. And is the version two the result of all the learnings from 5 years, or what is the main driver?
I think version 2 is me um, addressing all my regrets. So, um, well, it's a combination of things. My programming style as a developer has evolved a lot over the year. So part of how I am writing my code in a different way right now, I also wanted to see that reflected in the stuff that I work on for fun. So that should be fun for me as well. So if I keep getting confronted with the old style that I know has errors, or that I know that can be better, can be nicer, then of course, like, this is not a super gratifying experience to maintain. Of course, people had a lot of value out of V1, uh, but it also needed to stay fun for me to work on this. So it was a combination of seeing the errors and seeing how that could be different, and me wanting to enjoy to maintain it, because that's like the only way you're gonna spend so many hours on this. Like uh, you said, well, 2013, I started in it. In the first couple of years, um, I think I spent about at least, and that's years, right? So 3 or 4 years, I spent about uh, 30 hours per week on it, like on maintenance at least. So that's just improving stuff, adding new stuff. Like I built some of the adapters myself, I never use them. Other people use them. Other people benefit from it. They just file bug reports, and I'm just like a crazy person, just fix all the bugs of stuff that I don't even really use or care too deeply about, other than caring about that I like giving code away for free, apparently. Yeah, so
But so you mentioned that you're not even using parts of it, and there are bugs coming in for it. So how's the experience as a maintainer or the community feedback on that? So is it stressful, or is it always that you have the maybe the respect you think you would deserve on that part, or how does it work? How is it?
yeah. So I think if you enjoy giving code away for free, it's really, you should find enjoyment in giving, because truth be told, the majority of the open source community of consumers you will never have interaction with. Most won't even know that you are a person behind that project. Uh, there is a couple people that reach out and thank you. I've got a couple of GitHub sponsors now, and I really appreciate that. And I think that's awesome that people recognize this. But for the majority of your time spent, like it doesn't weigh up. Like the money doesn't weigh up. Uh, you get a lot more people who are uh, well, sometimes even angry and calling you weird names, like in either on Twitter, calling you an idiot or an incompetent fool or something like that. So like, there's a lot of, well, yeah, well, pardon my language, but there's a lot of assholes out there, and that's something. Yeah, you have to grow thick skin, and that also means like sometimes if it's too much, like there's no open source maintainer support group or anything like that, right? So you have to take care of yourself. So if sometimes it means like backing down from a project for a while, like I've had periods, I think in 2018, that sometimes for months I wouldn't look at the project. By that time, I was also like, no serious bug reports were coming in. I would still look at the bug reports, but for the rest, just pretty much ignore the project. Also, just to recharge myself, like not to get
Sure.
uh, burnt out from open source, because in the end, that would be, yeah, the least nice thing for the project. Like you don't see a lot of open source projects that change maintainership and then still thrive the way it does, right? So the majority of the projects that succeed are created and maintained by the creator, and that's usually how it is. So for me, it's also a bit of a responsibility to do my best to also keep myself in a position where I can and will maintain this. The contribution track record uh, has shown this, and I think from what I see in just maintenance in general, is that it also requires maintainers to make the not so popular decisions every once in a while for the greater good. Uh, for example, for V1, a lot of people just wanted to add getters for everything, right? So uh, Flysystem was basically the most developer unfriendly service locator you could imagine for a while. So it is easy and it is convenient, but I also know that it is a very big anti-pattern, that people shouldn't do that, and that their code will be better if they don't do it. And of course, you then sit on the place where you say, well, I know better than you, and I'm just going to restrict it and piss off or something. But that's not how maintainers intend that. They want you to benefit from those choices, and I'm confident that the choices that I made will have that effect. But yeah, it's not always fun, right, to make those choices. So it was also sometimes difficult because like that service locator is one thing, but in the end, like if you allow a getter for one thing, it's really hard to not allow a getter for the second thing and the third thing. And before you notice, the whole purpose of an adapter pattern is that you can replace it, and it's a
Yes.
non-leaky abstraction. And before you know it, everybody is coupled to the internals of a particular adapter, and that eliminates the entire focus of the project. So
Yeah.
uh, you want to still guard against these kind of forces that are at play for open source projects, and that's sometimes tough, and that's not always well understood. And there are just people that will just call you out on it, frantically disagree uh, if you get what I'm saying, and then you have to be resilient against that.
Yeah, but I would imagine over the past 7 years of maintaining Flysystem, there's something like a learning curve on that as well. So hopefully it's not that tough anymore for you. But I think it's something open source communities should often more speak about, because it's for a lot of maintainers it's quite hard to focus on the project and keeping maybe mental health in focus as well.
Definitely, yeah. Well, so when I released Flysystem V2, like I remember getting DMs from other open source maintainers like, hey, uh, we just released V2. I know what you're going through. Uh, just know that you can power through this. And so there's a bit more people reaching out these days. So that's nice.
All right. So before we come to the features or the changes in version 2, oh, there's one open question I see. How did test utilities for adapters come about?
Yeah. So the test utilities for adapters are one of the things that I learned over the last couple of years, is that I also implore in just projects that I work on, is that if you want to really capture the behavior of an adapter, like you can write tests, but if you write different tests for every adapter, how do you really guarantee that they function the same? Well, spoiler, you can't, because they're all different tests, so they might have altering implementations. So a technique that you can use, and this is actually the only case that I nowadays use abstract classes for, because in general I don't use abstract classes at all anymore, um, is to define a test case. So if you set your tests up in a very sort of behavioral way, not using a BDD framework or anything, but just really focus on the specific business behaviors in your tests, in your PHP unit tests. And if you provide an abstract interface for that, then you can make sure that every extension of that abstract interface provides their own implementation. So the FTP tests supply an adapter that is an FTP implementation, but the tests are all captured in this abstract test case, and they all run the same for everything. So this means that the behavior between the different file systems is guaranteed. So this eliminates a lot of the inconsistencies again from the different file system. So that's the idea behind it, and the test utilities themselves, they are useful for other people who want to maintain an adapter themselves. So they can require that as a dev dependency, and then use the same test cases that Flysystem ships. So they know that they can trust their implementation as much as they can trust one that is shipped and provided by Flysystem. So this also makes it easier for community adapters to get adoption, because now it's no longer a case like, oh, will this maintainer test them properly? Well, actually, the maintainer of Flysystem wrote the text, they only implemented. And because you trust the contract, you can trust the implementation.
That's pretty awesome. Yes. All right. So thanks for the insight on that already. And I think we are heading over to a small game to get some more insights about you as a programmer.
Cool.
All right, this is where I take over, and I will share my screen, and hopefully you can see it now.
Yep.
So for those of you who don't know what it is, basically we have a set of small questions. It's mostly X or Y, and it's randomized, so some question might come up multiple times, but we'll just skip over them. And yeah, the idea is that you just quickly answer which of those choices you would think is closer to your heart, or I don't know.
Yeah.
All right, let's start with the first one. Oh, I don't know how to spell it out. So basically, using the caret operator or having open-ended PHP versions.
This is right for the jugular, man. Come on. Yeah, this is. I think I'm on the second group, but I'm really proactive. Yeah. Oh, this is so hard. This
That's a mean start.
Yeah, this is like I think like I like open-endedness for other people. I like close-ended for myself.
Fair
That
enough.
seems like a fair answer. All right, PHP CS fixer or code sniffer?
PHP CS fixer.
Oh, PHP stan or Psalm?
PHP stan.
And light or dark themed editor?
Dark.
Oh, we already had this one. C or CSS?
CSS, definitely. So the thing is, like, I started out more as a front-end developer as well. So like, I wrote a ton of CSS. So yeah.
I'm really bad with front-end CSS, and I would still prefer it over C any day.
Yeah,
all right.
Fair enough.
Maybe the last one. Java or JavaScript?
Ooh. Well, I must admit I don't mind either. Like, but JavaScript.
All right. Let me stop presenting. And yeah, so with that break out of the way, let's get started with Flysystem version 2. What has changed? So you already said that basically your motivation was to improve on the things that you didn't like in the code base and make it nicer for you basically to work with Flysystem. Can you maybe give a few examples of what those things were that annoyed you and that you improved?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest change is that, well, I think the biggest change for consuming Flysystem is that there's now one unhappy path. So I had a design oopsie that I made for V1. And that is that I thought it would be a brilliant idea that if there is an error that you expect, that you would return false. Of course, this loses all context and there's no stack trace anymore. So if you want to do any logging, you basically have to guess what's up, and there could be a multitude of things leading up to this. But still, there could be exceptions for actually exceptional cases. So if you're consuming Flysystem, then one of the things that you end up doing a lot is getting a response from a particular method that's available on Flysystem, and then checking if that was false, and that's an error case, but then wrapping the entire thing in a try-catch as well to catch any exception, and now you've got two unhappy paths. Well, of course, this is like, nowadays, when I see code like that, my blood boils because I used to not care a lot about leaky abstractions. Well, this is probably my biggest thing that I'm focusing on these days, because it's incredibly hard to maintain stuff that has leaky abstractions, and so this needed to go, right? So that's one of the things that changed. The other one was the listings, so the list contents method. Especially for cases where there were a lot of files, people would run out of memory just by listing the contents of a directory. And there was no way around this in this design because an array needed to be returned. So therefore, you need to accumulate every and all things. So that means before you get it back, all the memory that you have in that process is consumed. And then only for the last bit, it overflows on that allocated memory. You get an out of memory exception. And then I get a stack trace in an issue saying, hey, your code broke my program, fix this. So of course, that's not really a nice experience. And I don't like having to re-explain it. It's like, hey, you've got too many things in your directory. And it's like, a lot of people were also responding with, well, it's not my directory I'm listing. This is, well, you've guessed it, an FTP server. So they just have to list everything that's in there, and they're not in control. So this meant that something needed to change. Well, luckily in PHP, we've got a couple of mechanisms that make this really easy, and those are all in the space of generators. So generators allow you to have a sort of more gradual approach where you just sort of pipe through the response, and similar to how file handles work for files where you only consume a little bit of the file at a time. The same thing goes for things that you can iterate over. So things like a directory listing where you've got multiple items, that works great with generators. So if you have something like AWS, that uses a sort of a paginated response kind of mechanism. So even if the thing is not able to be processed in one single HTTP call, from the consumer, it will just look like a continuous stream of file system entries. You won't even notice it, but behind the scenes, you will see paginated HTTP calls going. So this is, I think, is pretty magical. Like it almost sounds like a asynchronous JavaScript promise async await kind of ordeal if you think about it, but then sort of in a coroutine sort of way. So this was another big thing. And there were some other things. So for example, yeah, should I list them all, or did you want to ask some questions in between? Or like,
maybe one question in between regarding the generators. So because now when you use generators, you basically pull everything bit by bit. That means you also basically each time have to connect to the file system to get the next bit. Did that cause any issues where instead of having one large chunk that you get from the file system, having to do it bit by bit?
so the funny thing is, if you look at for example, the local file system, right? Because that's what you're referring to, having to do more file system calls. This is actually abstracted away for you already in the SPL implementation. So this is already a recursive iterator that goes over the multiple nodes and just does the traversing for you. And it did the same execution in V1. So in terms of execution, there's actually no difference. The only thing that is different is the memory consumption footprint. So there's no difference.
Okay, that's cool. And yeah, continue with the next features. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no worries. Let's see. I had, oh yeah, so the last thing that I was a little bit annoyed about, and that was a performance design issue. So what I did in V1 is have guards against certain preconditions. So if you wanted to write a file, Flysystem would check if that file didn't already exist. So this meant for the local file system, like a file exists, call to the file system. And then if the file already exists for a write, it would throw an exception. The same would happen inversely if you would have an update. So if there was an update, it first checked, well, is there a file? If not, then it would also throw this exception. So what people ended up writing is, if file system has, then update, else, then write. So not only is there a repetition in that same routine over and over, what you also see is that um, people just want one thing, and all the file systems are actually tailored towards overwriting by default. So not only is there redundancy in what you're trying to express, uh, it also costs a lot more in terms of calls. Because imagine if you're going through a routine like that. The first, and you're using AWS for this example, right? The first has, well, what is this? Well, it's a head object call. So that's one HTTP call. So, and that's only to check it. So the second one is the write. Well, internally, it does the has call to check for the precondition. So there's a second head object call in there. And then it does a write, right? So if it's the other way around, then still, if it's an update, then it will actually do a has, then an internal has again. And funny thing, under the hood, the AWS uses the same method and the same exact HTTP call in order to update it as it is to write it. So all this was complete BS, of course. It was totally not needed. But this is one of these design flaws that you think, well, it looks nice if I look at the code, well, I get this great feedback and all these responses, and that's pretty cool. But yeah, practically, it didn't matter. So what you get now is that if you want to overwrite a file, or write or update, you just do this file system or the file system instance, and then call the write method or the write stream if you've got a file handle. If you want to prevent something from being written, there's still a file exists handle, which is now specific for files because it was very flaky in terms of handling directories. So that's now only file specific, and directories are actually ignored. So this means that you can just use that function to check if you're going to override something, if that is what you care about. But it doesn't do that by default anymore. So it's a change. But still, if you cared about that before, you're going to still care about that now. But now it's going to save you one HTTP call. So at least it's going to be a little bit quicker.
All right, that's good to know. Yeah, speaking of how things are different from a user's perspective, do you have to make many changes to switch from V1 to V2? And maybe can you go into some detail what those changes are, or the bigger ones?
Yeah, so I think well, one of the changes is that if you have update calls, that you can just replace that instance with write. So update has been removed, put has been removed, and put was basically an abstraction over write and update that would mitigate that check, or at least it would not even mitigate it; it would do it for you. So it was basically a performance degradation as a service inside of the module. So other than that, the contents listings, of course, there are now streams, but they return an iterator, so you can still iterate over them. If you use the array lookup, well, all the value objects that you now get returned also implement the array access interface. So this means that you can still use string keys and treat it as if it was an array. There is one discrepancy that I found recently while I was preparing for a presentation about it, and that is that the size key has been renamed to file underscore size. But in the next release, I'm just replacing that with an alias, so you can still use that for backwards compatibility's sake. So the responses will be somewhat the same. In terms of the generic interface, like reading and writing, you still get just back scalar values. So for that, there's not going to be a difference. There is going to be a difference if you're using the plugin system, and some difference if you're using the mount manager. So the plugin system was always my dirty way of soft rejecting features where people wanted to gain access to the underlying resources and stuff like that. And they wanted to build something that broke the encapsulation. And I was like, well, there's not a way for me to do this. And I was like, yeah, you can just write your plugin and then, you have it. And these days I'm a little bit more comfortable with saying just use the SDK directly, or just use your own file system thing directly. Flysystem is for file storage. It is not a pure replacement of everything in the file system. It's about the abstraction. It's about the uniformity. So if you need specialized cases, use a specialized solution. I'm more comfortable with that now. Also because I have the sort of theoretical knowledge to back it up. So if people really want to throw a fit in one of the GitHub issues, I'm more than equipped nowadays to slap them back with some theory around how they're making the worst decision ever. So that allows me to defend these design choices a little bit better. So if you're just using the run-of-the-mill Flysystem functionality, there's a couple methods that are renamed, but apart from that, it should be relatively easy. And just for reference, Dries Vriends, who maintains a lot of the Laravel code base, he converted their Flysystem integration in, I think, a matter of hours. So in that regard, yeah, I don't think people will notice a lot, but what they might notice is that, for example, directory listings also come with a couple of convenience utilities that allow you to filter and map over these response listings, also in a sort of a lazy generator based way. And that API is just a lot more developer friendly, I would say. So I hope that people notice that those kind of things are improved.
Maybe coming back to the file listings being streams, I just remembered a while back I was using Flysystem v1 with streaming data to the file system, because basically I had the same issue that you described with memory issues from too large content, but I wanted to write it. So I know that Flysystem v1 already supported streaming your data to the file system, but were there any changes for v2 regarding that to make it maybe a little bit easier? For convenience functions or something like that?
Not really. Like with PHP, you're really limited to what the file system, or what the language itself supports. So the only options that you have is a file handle or a string that's fully in memory. I doubt that will change. There are some changes in this neck of the woods of PHP, where they are converting all the resources to actual objects. But that is just more like a specific label, so you can distinguish on the type. So you can't pass a FTP connection into a like imagic function, for example. Right? Then you get a type error. You would get an error anyway, but now it's a little bit nicer and more type safe, I guess. So resources in PHP are funky little things that are basically everything and nothing. And now they will be a little bit more formalized in a way. But for the end user, this is not going to change anything. If it's going to change for anybody, well, it's going to be me again, because now I need to check if it's a valid resource and check if it's an instance of that FTP connection for FTP stuff, or yeah, I don't know what they're going to do with the file handle things. I don't think they've got a class for that yet. They do have it for other resource types, but that's it. Yeah, that's not going to change a lot. Yeah.
But that's a good point. That upgrading to PHP 8, where those basically where they started, having resources as a more strict type, did that cause any trouble for you?
Not really. I was looped in once in a GitHub issue by Graham Campbell, and he pinged like, "Hey, is this going to be an issue?" And it's like, "Yeah, doesn't seem to be." And test row passing in PHP 8 already when I didn't even know that that landed yet. So I think we were fortunately in a good place.
Oh, that's cool. At least from that side, a little bit less work.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't need to make any changes there, so that was nice.
And you already mentioned that basically your plugin system went out because you felt that it was just a crutch for people to do the dirty stuff that you don't want to support anymore. Did you get any feedback when you announced that, or especially from plugin maintainers, where they basically came to you like, oh yeah, but now I can't do this anymore. Can I get this now into core?
I think I've had some responses on Twitter, but not really on GitHub. So people are not even taking the trouble to complain about it. On Twitter, they were like, "Yeah, but now I can't do this stuff anymore." And then I had a couple of discussions where I explained them how they would do this stuff by themselves. And yeah, that works just as well. So for them, it's less magic, clearer, more predictable. So I think it's a win for everybody. There's this sort of magic atrocity has been laid to rest effectively. Right? It's yeah, I'm not sorry to see it go. One thing that was originally not in the 2.0 release, but I actually re-added after more significant feedback was the mount manager. So this is an interface where you basically have a collection of file systems that you interact with, and based on a string prefix that looks like a protocol, like instead of HTTP colon slash slash, you would have um, AWS and then a path after it, and it would distinguish which file system you use based on that prefix. And this is something that I did have a couple of discussions about, and I re-implemented that, although in a different form a little bit than it was. Well, one, also no plugins, because that thing also supported plugins. Yeah, it was the most gross concept that I had in my previous incarnation of Flysystem. So plugins are out, but so are mutating the amount of file systems after you construct it. So this is more in terms of predictability of something. So people were using the mount manager again as a service locator and dynamically attaching and removing file systems from it for, well, no other reason but then not to have a builder class. And this is just where normal design patterns are there to help you construct other objects that need dynamic dependencies. So there's patterns for this, and people just, yeah, well, basically learn those and use those when appropriate, and not try to shoehorn all that functionality into one or effectively every library, right? If you learn this design pattern, you can apply it for everything that does not support it. And if you refuse to learn design patterns for those kind of reasons, you force every maintainer to increase the maintenance service of their open source packages. Well, that's ludicrous, right? People should learn something and use it.
Makes absolute sense.
There is a bit of feedback in the chat. So Matthias writes, "Thanks for Flysystem, Frank." And Alexander writes, "I had to fetch data via FTP recently. Some people apparently still think that exposing CSV via FTP is a valid API. Having a tool like Flysystem really is a great relief in such situations." That's not really a question, but I think thanks as well. Then
Yeah,
there
you're
is
welcome.
uh,
I can I can tell you for one, like fintech and FTP are quite closely related, and that's all about as much as I can tell you. Like Molly, we supply nice APIs and webhooks and whatnot. Uh, but what happens in the back, the stuff that we need to suffer through in order to give people nice APIs, that's you don't want to see that stuff. So,
And there is actually a question by C. Nagel, were there some difficult decisions in rewriting process?
difficult is, well, yes. So one was the decision to change anything at all. This was difficult because I know that if I do significant rewrites, every bit of resistance will hinder a little bit the adoption. So you have to make it worthwhile. So for example, the listing that is different, it has significant upsides, but it also means that because it's so foreign to what it was now, to what it was back then, that you probably need to alter it if you really want to make full use of it. So that means that I have to weigh out every decision that I envisioned. And I have to be totally honest, like I think I rewrote Flysystem about 4 or 5 times before I rewrote it in the public. So I did a couple of incarnations just on my private accounts just to write it, do a couple of example things with it, and then wait a week and see, like, if I look back at it, do I still like what I see? I did a couple of iterations of that before committing to it more publicly, and then it was also sort of a point of no return. After a while, I thought, like, yeah, I'm just gonna go for it, and then see what happens.
All right. I will share my screen quickly because there's one last question I'm interested about. It's about complexity. So I hope you can see my tab now. Oh
Yeah.
no, doesn't work for the crowd, I guess. Wait a second. So this should work on YouTube as well. You can see the beginning in November 2013, and then this, the first dot 1, dot 2, and then you described the phase before Laravel adapted it from 0.5, and then there is a breakdown to 1.0. I think you mentioned that you were ironing out some issues there, so that is quite interesting to see that is part of the complexity curve as well. Is complexity something you are tackling, or is it not in the measurement for you that is interesting?
Well, it is like it is a very important thing. This dip, though, is very technical in its explanation, and it's going to be very underwhelming as well. When I was developing up to the 1.0 release, all the adapters were living in the same code base, and they were all dev dependencies. So this is not the right way to do dependency management, but it was very convenient to start working on it. So when I committed to 1.0, I separated out all the packages, and that lowers the complexity immensely. And now for 2.0, I've adopted a monorepo maintenance style. So what I do now is I've got one package that I work on, and I use the same tooling that Laravel and Symfony use in order to publish subsplits of that package, and those are being distributed. So what you're seeing here, this bump in complexity, is actually my choice of re-adopting the monorepo style, But now it's not one package that's being distributed. It's actually a multitude. I just maintain it centrally. So
Okay.
that's that's the reason for that. I think there is a slight complexity increase, and that is due to the fact that well, I like composition over inheritance, and there's a lot more places where you can actually do composition now within the project. So, for example, if you look at the new FTP adapter, you can control how you do connection checking. So before, what it did was the most reliable way to check if an FTP connection is active is to use it, unfortunately. And so then you need to do a command that is non-destructive in order to validate that you get a response that is a non-negative. So it needs to be a response that is okay. Unfortunately, in PHP, there's not, or in FTP, there's not a lot of commands that actually satisfy this. So for V1, what we would do is do a listing of the root directory. So you can imagine that if you have a very large root directory with a lot of listings, this is a very expensive call to perform every time you want to perform an operation.
Sure, yes.
So there's actually a very more performant call that you can do, and that is a no-op. So you just get back an okay. Unfortunately, FTP being as standardized as it is, and that is not because it's it's more like FTP is F, that's protocol, and you can fill in what the F stands for. So nobody conforms to anything. So that noob command that you can send is not supported by quite a number of connections. So now there's an interface that accepts a resource, an FTP connection, and the implementation of that thing can determine whether or not this connection is deemed to be alive or not. So if a noob command is working for you, you can supply that implementation. If not, the default is still the raw list, but perhaps you want to have that raw list on a different location. Perhaps a directory where you know that there is not a lot of files, so the performance of that check will decrease, or the expense of that rather will decrease. So that's just one of the places where you now have a cut point into changing the behavior of Flysystem while still respecting the abstraction. So this is just an example for the connection handling, but even the connection provider is something that you, like there's multiple ways to create an FTP connection. This is true for normal FTP, but also, for example, for SFTP, where we use PHP seglib in order to create a connection there. There is like weird double handshake sort of setups that some people need to resort to because they're like behind a VPN and then behind a double handshake protocol that's super elaborate. For PHP seglib, it's all the same. But how can a file system adapter figure out what kind of elaborate authentication scheme somebody uses, right? That's madness. So now you can just create your own way to do that. A big part of this decision was also in terms of visibility. Visibility was already sort of a far stretch for a cross-adapter concept where people could define what it means to have something be public and what it means for something to be private. And I basically created the defaults, but now every adapter that's out there has an interface that they can implement in order to create their own translation between what does it mean for public to be replicated in the file system? What does it mean for private to be replicated in the file system? So there's a lot more freedom, but of course, like if there's a convention, it's easy, right? You just do the one thing. And now you have to have an integration, and that integration again is a point of interaction. So in the total amount of things that are in the repository, you go up. So that is the source of the complexity, but it's very much the managed complexity, and that's very functional for the end user.
Well, I think there was a lot of very interesting insights tonight. So thanks for that. Learning about FTP quirks and and even to see how many thoughts are going into an abstraction of a file system. That's quite interesting, and I think that's, from my point of view, the key reason why Flysystem is such a success. So I think one takeaway as well for people is that patterns and learning basic programmer skills is very, very important. Frank, once again, thank you for joining us tonight. Is there something you want to add, or you want to plug something?
Well, maybe my other open source project. So like apart from Flysystem, I also work on event source. And event source is an event sourcing framework. So if you're into that style of programming, be sure to check it out. And if you're an awesome PHP developer that likes to work in the space of fintech, then at Molly, of course, we're hiring. Yeah. Other than that, thank you for having me on the podcast. I had a lot of fun.
That's great.
So thank you.
So thanks to everyone joining in, even if you're late, like the last one just wrote. I think we're back in 2 weeks on Thursday, 25th of February, and the next topic is Breath 1.0 with Mathieu Napoli. So I hope we see each other again on that day, and have a great night. Bye.
Bye.